A boss fires a pregnant woman, but what happens next shocks everyone. Rachel Parker stood in the cramped break room of Willow Creek Advertising, clutching a mug of decaffeinated tea that had long since gone lukewarm. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead drew her into a restless state of reflection. Outside, her coworkers zipped through corridors and tapped fervently on keyboards, immersed in last-minute deadlines typical of a Thursday afternoon. She gently placed one hand over her small but noticeable baby bump, 17 weeks along, and the next big ultrasound was only a couple of weeks away. The knowledge that her life was transforming day by day felt both miraculous and frightening. In that moment, she felt the subtle flutters deep inside, as though her unborn child sensed her anxiety. She closed her eyes and inhaled slowly, steadying her mind. The day had been peppered with small frustrations and a near-constant wave of queasiness. Oddly enough, the biggest challenge wasn't her pregnancy symptoms. It was her boss, Milo West, CEO and founder of Willow Creek Advertising. He'd been ignoring her emails for the past week, a situation that would have been slightly more tolerable had he not also been avoiding her in the office. Rumors swirled that he was unhappy with the pace of her latest project. That knowledge filled her with dread. Rachel sighed and abandoned her lukewarm tea. She had more urgent tasks awaiting her at her desk, including finalizing an ad campaign for a new client, a local organic foods brand that prided itself on family-friendly, ethically sourced products. The irony of working on a family-friendly ad campaign while worrying about her own future at the company wasn't lost on her. Clutching a stack of colorful printouts, Rachel headed back through the narrow corridor to her corner workspace. She decorated the space with small succulents and pinned motivational quotes on the partition, little reminders to keep pushing forward through the stress. Peering at her computer, she read the latest email from a client. They loved her concept of highlighting family togetherness around a farmhouse table, but they wanted a subtle color change on the packaging design. "All right," she whispered under her breath, "I can tweak that." She adjusted the layout in Photoshop, inching the color palette from cool neutrals to a warmer tone that evoked comfort and health. A sense of satisfaction bubbled up as she watched the ad come to life with these small changes. This was the part of her job she loved, breathing creativity into a product, shaping how people felt about it. She tapped away, fingers gliding across the keyboard in a steady rhythm. Then she heard a voice. "Rachel," came a curt male tone from behind. She swiveled in her chair to find her immediate supervisor, Eric Lee, wearing a somber expression. "Milo wants to see you in his office. Now." Her stomach lurched. Milo had never requested a sudden meeting with her unless it was pressing, and typically, it was about something gone awry. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. Sure. Did he say what it was about? Eric shook his head. He didn't elaborate. "Just told me to find you." He glanced at her baby bump, then quickly averted his eyes. There was a flicker of concern on his face, a silent apology. "Good luck," he added softly. She offered a polite nod and rose from her seat, smoothing the wrinkles in her blouse. Her reflection in her computer screen revealed tired eyes and a tension in her features. She gave a small, forced smile at her reflection. Then she made the short walk to Milo's corner office, each step echoing in her mind like a heartbeat drumroll. Milo West's office had an enormous glass window overlooking downtown. The city's bustle nothing more than toy cars and distant silhouettes from this vantage. A large walnut desk commanded the center of the room, sleek and imposing, as though it were a throne of sorts. Milo himself sat behind it, posture rigid. He was in his early 50s, his once brown hair now tinged with gray at the temples, lending him an air of hard-earned authority. He offered no friendly greeting as she stepped in. "Close the door," he said flatly. She obeyed, heart pounding. Her eyes flicked around the office. A few corporate awards lined a credenza, along with photos of Milo shaking hands with local business magnates and municipal leaders. She remembered seeing those pictures before, but now they felt like silent witnesses to something ominous. She approached his desk, half expecting him to at least muster a polite question about her well-being, given her pregnancy. But no such gesture came. He cleared his throat. "Rachel, we need to discuss your performance." He leaned forward, hands folded. Specifically, the delays on the Jacobs account. She tried not to let the surprise show on her face. I'm on schedule as far as I know. I delivered the preliminary design concepts 2 days ahead of the initial target." Jacobs' feedback was positive. She paused, searching her memory. Did something change? Milo inhaled sharply, eyes narrowing. "This brand launch requires a level of focus that I'm not convinced you can provide right now. Your condition," his gaze dropped to her stomach, then darted away with a faint sneer, "presents complications. I'm already seeing missed days because of doctor appointments, morning sickness, or whatever reasons you keep giving." Rachel felt her heart hammer. She'd missed precisely 2 days in the last 3 months, one due to severe morning sickness and the other for a mandatory ultrasound appointment she'd scheduled weeks in advance. She'd always worked from home when needed, completing her tasks and responding to emails. She parted her lips to protest. "Milo," she said as steadily as she could, "I assure you my performance is not slipping. I'm meeting deadlines and—" He cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Regardless, I've decided it's best to let you go. Effective immediately." His tone was ice cold, laced with a finality that sent a chill down her spine. "I can't have a senior creative who can't guarantee 100% commitment." At that, Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, uncertain she'd heard correctly. "You're firing me?" she asked, voice trembling. Because I'm pregnant." He scoffed. "No, of course not. I'm firing you because your performance is slipping. You're free to interpret it however you want. But your role here is no longer necessary." He pulled open a desk drawer, extracting a manila envelope. "Here's your final paycheck and a small severance. The company thanks you for your service." She was too stunned to speak. Her head swam. She'd heard rumors that Milo could be ruthless, but she'd never imagined he'd stoop to something so blatantly discriminatory. A swirl of emotions, anger, fear, betrayal, warred within her. She wanted to fling the envelope across the room, to rage about the injustice. But tears threatened to surface, and she fought them back. She refused to let him see her crumble. Summoning what composure she had left, Rachel took a slow breath. "This is not right, Milo. You know the law. You can't fire a woman just because she's pregnant." He shrugged. "As I said, interpret how you want. I have documentation that your productivity has declined. If you choose to argue, well, that's your prerogative. Now, kindly pack your belongings." There wasn't an ounce of sympathy in his gaze. She stood rooted in place, stunned. For a flicker of a moment, she thought she saw a twitch of uncertainty in Milo's expression, as though he knew he was on precarious legal ground. But if so, he covered it well with a mask of cold confidence. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. With trembling hands, she accepted the envelope. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her voice quaking with barely contained emotion. Then she turned on her heel, marched toward the office door, and exited, not daring to look back. The hallway outside felt like a surreal dream. Co-workers bustled by, occasionally glancing at her with confusion or mild curiosity, but no one stopped her. In a daze, she returned to her desk. She found an empty cardboard box from the supply closet and started gathering her personal items. The entire time, her mind whirred. How will I explain this to my husband? How will we pay rent now? They had just begun saving for the baby's future. Her health insurance had been tied to her job. Thoughts piled up, swirling in an ever-growing vortex of anxiety. Eric appeared at her cubicle, his face a swirl of shock and concern. "Rachel, what's happening?" She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "He fired me," she managed. "Effective immediately." Eric's eyes widened. He can't do that just because. Rachel shook her head, numb. He did. He claimed my performance was lacking. She shoved a potted succulent into the box, her movements jerky. I can't believe this is happening. Eric hovered, looking torn between comforting her and worrying about his own job. His eyes flicked around, as if worried Milo might show up. Is there anything I can do? She exhaled shakily. I appreciate it, Eric, but I'm not sure there's anything to do right now. I just need to get out of here. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the rustling of papers as she gathered her portfolio samples, a couple of picture frames, and her beloved desk trinkets, a small, smiling Buddha statue her mother had given her for good luck, and a decorative paperweight with the words, "Create something beautiful," engraved on it. She clutched that last piece, thinking of how ironically hollow it felt now. As she finished packing, a pang of shame and despair coursed through her. She forced herself to stand tall, refusing to scuttle away like a defeated animal. People noticed her leaving. Some approached with parted lips, as if to ask questions, but the lump in her throat prevented her from answering. By the time she reached the elevator, tears were threatening to spill over. She stepped in, pressed the ground floor button, and stared at her reflection in the brushed metal doors. She saw a woman who had poured her creativity, time, and ambition into a company that had just cast her aside at the moment she needed stability most. The injustice radiated through her, fueling a slow-burning resolve beneath her shock. As the elevator descended, she rubbed her belly softly, whispering, "It's going to be okay, baby. It has to be." Outside, the wind had picked up, blowing crisp early spring air against her cheeks. She stood on the sidewalk, balancing the cardboard box in her arms, scanning the passing cars. A swirl of city noise, honking horns, chatter from pedestrians, punctuated her heartbreak. She rummaged for her phone, texting her husband, Adam, about the news. She kept it brief. Fired from Willow Creek. Coming home. Will explain. Love you. Then she hailed a cab, not trusting herself to drive in her emotional state. The ride home felt interminable. She stared out the window at the passing neighborhoods, brownstone apartments, a corner cafe she used to frequent, a small park where she sometimes strolled on lunch breaks. Each sight felt tinged with sorrow. She thought about the baby. This was supposed to be a happy time, preparing for new life. Now it felt overshadowed by financial worries and heartbreak. When she finally reached the small apartment she and Adam rented, she paid the cab driver with shaky hands, carried the box up 3 flights of stairs, and fumbled with her keys at the door. Adam was already there, waiting in the living room. He rushed to her side the moment she stepped in, worry etched across his face. He had short, sandy blonde hair, kind blue eyes, and a gentle energy that always comforted her. But tonight, he looked as lost as she felt. He took the box from her, setting it on the coffee table. "Rachel, my God, are you okay?" She let out a ragged breath and melted into his arms, tears finally escaping in hot streams down her cheeks. "He fired me," she murmured. "Just like that. Because I'm pregnant, no matter what he says." Adam held her tight. "That's illegal. Discrimination. We can fight this." She sniffled, wiping her tears on his shoulder. I know, but I don't know how. Lawyers cost money. We can't afford anything like that right now, especially with the baby on the way." He guided her to the worn sofa, where they sat, shoulders touching. "We'll figure something out. Maybe there's a labor rights group, or we can find a pro bono attorney who handles pregnancy discrimination. Or we can talk to your parents for advice. Just something." Rachel gazed down at her hands, feeling the dryness of her skin from stress. She took a long, trembling breath. "Let's see if I can get unemployment benefits first. Then maybe we check if any local organizations offer free legal consultation." Her voice wavered, but a flicker of determination lit her eyes. "He doesn't get to just do this and walk away." Adam nodded. "No, he doesn't." Despite her fear, Rachel felt the faintest spark of hope. She placed a hand on her belly again, drawing strength from the tiny life growing within. "I'm fighting for you," she whispered in her mind, imagining the baby hearing her vow. The following days were a haze of phone calls, online research, and swirling emotions. Rachel discovered, to her relief, that pregnancy discrimination was indeed illegal under federal law, yet proving it could be tricky. Milo would likely claim poor performance, which was the excuse he'd already given. Still, she documented everything. Her consistent work record, emails praising her recent designs, and timestamps showing how often she worked from home, even when sick, to keep up with deadlines. She compiled witness names, including Eric's, who could testify that her performance was on track. Meanwhile, financial fears surged. Adam's salary as a junior architect covered only their basic needs. They had some meager savings, but with a baby on the way, medical bills would pile up fast. Their landlord had just raised the rent by a modest amount. Still, it felt like a mountain in their precarious situation. Each passing day brought more anxiety. Some nights, Rachel lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, baby flutters in her belly, feeling helpless as her future seemed to crumble. She felt a growing sense of desperation to find a new job. But as soon as potential employers learned she was pregnant, their polite interest often dissipated. She tried to hide her bump under loose sweaters during interviews, but it was still fairly obvious. The rejections piled up quickly, each one hammering her self-worth. Adam found her one morning curled on the sofa, puffy-eyed from crying. She was wearing an old sweatshirt with the words, "Life is good," ironically emblazoned across the front. He sat beside her and took her hand. "There's a local attorney recommended by one of my coworkers," he said gently, "who specializes in labor law. She offers free consultations. Maybe we should talk to her." Rachel nodded, clearing her throat. "What's her name?" "Pamela Foster," he replied, offering her a business card. "You can call today." Though her heart throbbed with the fear of more disappointment, Rachel decided it was worth a shot. That afternoon, she dialed the number. Pamela Foster answered in a calm, warm voice. Rachel described her situation. A pregnant senior creative at an ad agency fired abruptly, suspecting discrimination. Pamela listened patiently, then asked pointed questions about timelines, documentation, and any prior tension around her pregnancy. After about 20 minutes, she sighed. "You seem to have a plausible case, Rachel," the attorney said. "I'd need to review your evidence, of course, but from what you're telling me, it sure sounds like the company is on shaky ground. If you want to pursue legal action, we can schedule a deeper consultation. I'd do some cases pro bono if I believe there's a strong chance to set a precedent or help someone with a clear injustice." Relief flooded Rachel's chest, mingling with caution. "That would be incredible," she said quietly. "I have emails and project records. I can bring them in whenever you're free." They arranged to meet in Pamela's office the next day. When Rachel ended the call, she felt for the first time a sense of momentum. Maybe she wasn't powerless after all. Pamela Foster's office was housed in a small, weathered brick building that had been converted into a legal practice. The waiting room smelled faintly of old books and peppermint. The walls displayed certificates and frames of local newspaper clippings detailing successful lawsuits. Pamela herself was in her early 40s, with short, curly hair and a direct gaze that radiated confidence. She greeted Rachel warmly, offered her water, and ushered her into a cozy office lined with more books than she'd ever seen in one space. They talked for almost an hour, Pamela occasionally taking notes or scanning Rachel's email printouts. Every so often, she'd pause to ask clarifying questions. "Did your boss say anything about your pregnancy specifically? Did he mention concerns about your maternity leave? Have you had prior conflicts with him?" Rachel answered as accurately as she could. Her voice trembled at times, recalling the humiliating moment he fired her. But as she spoke, she noticed Pamela's eyes narrowing in a way that signaled righteous anger. Pamela leaned back in her chair. "Well, from what I see, Willow Creek Advertising could be in violation of the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. Firing a pregnant woman purely because of her pregnancy or using a flimsy performance excuse while ignoring your documented successes is a big no-no. But these cases aren't always straightforward. Milo might claim something else. However, she offered Rachel a small, supportive smile. We stand a good chance if you want to fight. Rachel's heart pounded. I do, she whispered, but I'm worried about the cost. Adam and I have limited savings. We're expecting in just a few months. Pamela waved a hand. Don't worry about a retainer for now. I'll work on contingency or pro bono if needed. The important thing is we gather your evidence, we draft a formal demand letter, and see if Willow Creek Advertising is open to a settlement. If not, we proceed. How does that sound? Rachel felt tears prick her eyes, this time from relief and gratitude. That sounds. I can't thank you enough, she murmured. Pamela nodded. No need for thanks. I've seen women endure far too much discrimination. We'll do our best to hold them accountable. They shook hands, sealing an alliance that sparked a fresh wave of hope in Rachel's heart. She left the office feeling lighter, though still aware this was just the beginning of a potentially long and stressful journey. But at least she wasn't alone anymore. The next week, Pamela sent a formal demand letter to Willow Creek Advertising, detailing the allegations of wrongful termination based on pregnancy. The letter requested that the company provide compensation for lost wages, reinstatement if possible, and coverage of emotional distress. Rachel's pulse soared at the mere thought of facing Milo again, but a quiet sense of vindication pushed her forward. 2 days later, Pamela informed her that Willow Creek's legal team had responded. They denied all allegations, insisted Rachel was terminated due to poor performance, and refused to offer any settlement. Which is pretty standard at this point, Pamela said. We expected them to push back. Rachel tried to remain calm. So what now? Pamela's eyes glinted with determination. Now we escalate. We file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and possibly initiate a lawsuit. That might rattle them, or they might double down. She paused. Are you up for the fight? Rachel placed a protective hand over her belly, inhaling deeply. Yes, she said softly. I'm done being pushed around. Thus began a flurry of legal steps that felt surreal to Rachel. She'd never imagined herself embroiled in a lawsuit. She was an artist, a designer, someone who typically avoided conflict. But each piece of paper filed, each email exchanged, each phone call with Pamela crystallized her resolve. Milo had fired her in a moment of cold dismissal. She wouldn't let that be the end of the story. Alongside the legal battle, life marched on. Her belly swelled, morning sickness receded, and the baby's kicks grew stronger. Adam was her rock, celebrating every milestone with her while juggling extra hours at his architecture firm for some financial buffer. They tightened their budget. No more takeout, no new clothes unless absolutely necessary, and they canceled their streaming services. Sometimes the stress left them snapping at each other over trivial matters, like who forgot to do laundry, but they always made up, reminding themselves they were a team. Rachel's family was supportive, though they lived a couple hours away. Her mother, a retired teacher, offered to come stay when the baby arrived, while her father frequently reminded her to not let that jerk boss win. She told them about the lawsuit, and they expressed cautious optimism. This might take a while, her mother warned gently. Legal issues drag on. Make sure you're taking care of your health. Rachel promised she would. Meanwhile, unconfirmed rumors trickled back from her old coworkers at Willow Creek. Eric discreetly emailed her from a personal account, updating her on the tense atmosphere. Milo is fuming about a potential lawsuit, he wrote. He's telling everyone you were incompetent, but not everyone's buying it. We all know how dedicated you were. I'm sorry I can't do more. Rachel sighed. She felt empathy for Eric. She didn't want to endanger his job by pulling him directly into the conflict. Still, it comforted her to know some colleagues recognized the truth. Weeks turned into months. Rachel's pregnancy progressed into the 3rd trimester, bringing with it new physical challenges, an achy back, swollen ankles, and an unrelenting need to visit the restroom every half hour. She also found a small freelance gig designing invitations for a wedding planner friend, which gave her some income and a chance to keep her creative skills sharp. Nonetheless, financial strain loomed. They managed each day, but worry for the future clung to her thoughts like a stubborn shadow. The legal process remained slow. Willow Creek's lawyers repeatedly asked for time extensions. Each motion or response felt like an attempt to wear Rachel down, hoping she'd just drop the case. Pamela, however, maintained a calm determination, telling her, "This is part of the game. They're stalling, expecting you to give up. Don't let them break you." One evening, while Rachel pored over more design work from her freelance gig, the doorbell rang. Adam answered, only to return with a puzzled expression. Honey, you might want to see this." Rachel walked to the door, heart fluttering. Standing there was Eric, coat rumpled, eyes darting around as if he was afraid of being followed. "Eric, hi," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Is everything okay?" He glanced over his shoulder before entering. "I hope so. I'm sorry to show up out of the blue. I needed to talk to you." She led him into the living room, where they sat on the sofa. Adam joined, offering a glass of water. Eric accepted gratefully, taking a sip before speaking. "Things at Willow Creek are a mess. Milo's under a lot of pressure. We lost a major client last month because they found out about your lawsuit and didn't want the negative PR. He's been scrambling, blaming everyone but himself." Rachel's eyes widened. A flicker of grim satisfaction tugged at her. "He's telling people that's the reason?" Eric nodded. "Yeah, though ironically, it's because the client was some progressive brand that valued diversity and fairness. They saw the headlines about your claim. It's not huge news yet, but in local business circles, it's circulating. So they bailed." Rachel exchanged a glance with Adam. This was news indeed. "So, why come here in person to tell me?" Eric swallowed, looking suddenly uncomfortable. "I found something. A file. Milo left it out when he rushed into a meeting. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. I didn't know if it was illegal for me to take it, but I made copies. Inside, there are explicit memos referencing your pregnancy. Specifically, Milo stated that your pregnancy was a liability and that Willow Creek needed to get rid of the problem before it becomes a PR nightmare. He wrote that to the HR director." Rachel's breath caught. Adam let out a low whistle. "That's huge," he said. Eric nodded fervently. "I think it's a smoking gun. You're not incompetent. Everyone knows you were great at your job. This proves he singled you out purely because you were pregnant. I had to share it with you. I hope I'm not stepping over a line. But it's the right thing to do." Tears of gratitude welled in Rachel's eyes. "Eric, thank you," she whispered. "But you could lose your job if Milo finds out." He waved a hand. "Honestly, I'm planning to quit soon anyway. The atmosphere is toxic. Milo's meltdown is making everyone miserable. I want to be somewhere that actually respects employees." He sighed. "Anyway, take this. Use it in court if you have to. I just needed you to know the truth was documented." She accepted the folder with trembling hands. Inside were printed emails, all of them laced with casual cruelty. "She's going to cost us in maternity leave. Her presence makes the team inefficient. We need to let her go discreetly." The final line, typed in an email from Milo to HR, read, "Her pregnancy is becoming a nuisance. She's got to go." Shock gave way to a deep, trembling rage. I can't believe you wrote this in plain text," she muttered. "It's horrifying." Eric nodded. He must have been too arrogant to think it would leak. "I'm so sorry you had to go through all this." Adam placed a reassuring hand on Rachel's shoulder. She drew a shaky breath, then turned to Eric. "Thank you. This changes everything. Will you be okay?" He offered a tentative smile. "Yeah, I'll be fine. I'll probably find a new position somewhere else soon. I can't stay at Willow Creek. Just promise me you'll win." Rachel squeezed his hand in gratitude. "We'll try." After Eric left, she and Adam pored over the documents in stunned silence. Adam's face darkened with anger, but Rachel felt, for the first time in months, an exhilaration. Like a puzzle piece she needed had finally fallen into place. She called Pamela immediately, describing the folder's contents. Pamela's voice nearly leaped with excitement. This is the smoking gun we needed. Milo basically admitted he fired you for being pregnant. This is solid evidence. We'll file these documents with the court right away. The game just changed, my friend. Rachel's pulse pounded. She was 8 months pregnant now, exhausted and anxious, but the prospect of justice glimmered. She pictured Milo's smug face when he told her to pack her belongings, and a slow, fierce determination lit in her chest. 3 weeks later, they found themselves in a small conference room at the local courthouse, engaged in settlement talks. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to weigh on Rachel's chest. On one side of the table sat Milo, flanked by 2 lawyers. He wore a crisp navy suit and exuded an air of forced calm, though a subtle flicker in his eyes betrayed nerves. On the other side sat Rachel, Adam for moral support, and Pamela in her professional glory, calm, collected, but unwavering. They'd filed the new evidence the previous week, and Milo's side had scrambled. The judge encouraged both parties to mediate before proceeding to a full trial, which could be expensive for both sides. Rachel was grateful. In her heavily pregnant state, she wasn't eager for a lengthy court battle, but she would do whatever it took to see it through if needed. A mediator, a soft-spoken older man named Harold, opened the session, explaining that both parties could present their positions. Milo's lawyers repeated the tired line about performance issues, but it sounded hollow now. Pamela, with quiet conviction, slid the copies of Milo's damning emails across the table. The hush in the room was deafening as Milo's lawyers flipped through them, their expressions grim. Finally, Milo broke the silence, voice strained. These are private communications taken without authorization. We question their admissibility. Pamela raised an eyebrow. Regardless, it shows your real motive. Unless you want to dispute the authenticity of your own emails? He glared at her, then shot a look at Rachel. This was never personal, he said, forcing a tone that might have sounded contrite had Rachel not seen the cruelty of those emails. I made a business decision, that's all. She felt her baby kick, reminding her of what was truly at stake. She squared her shoulders. Firing a pregnant woman because you think she's a nuisance is personal, she replied, voice unwavering. Milo's expression tightened. He seemed to realize his cornered position. One of his lawyers cleared her throat. We propose a settlement, she said, glancing at Milo for approval. A small monetary compensation to avoid further legal entanglements. Let's be reasonable. Pamela nodded. We're open to a fair settlement, but we'll need more than small. My client has lost wages, health benefits, and endured emotional distress. And she has documented evidence your client fired her unlawfully due to her pregnancy. We also have reason to believe Ms. Parker deserves punitive damages, given the blatant discrimination. We can let a jury decide if necessary. A hush fell. Milo's face turned crimson. He whispered something to his lawyers, who responded by flipping through a file and scribbling notes. The mediator watched, expression neutral but watchful. After a few minutes, the lead lawyer cleared her throat. We propose a settlement that includes compensation for lost wages and a portion for emotional distress. In return, Ms. Parker agrees not to disclose the details publicly or to any press. Pamela studied the numbers scrawled on the pad the lawyer had slid across the table. She shook her head. Too low. And a non-disclosure might be negotiable, but we need a larger figure. We also want coverage of her legal fees. Tension crackled. Another series of whispered conversations took place. Meanwhile, Rachel, feeling the ache in her lower back, shifted uncomfortably. Adam reached to rub her shoulder. She felt the baby do a somersault and tried to steady her breathing. Finally, Milo's team scribbled a new figure, higher than the first, and slid it across the table. Pamela studied it, conferred briefly with Rachel, who nodded. The number was significant, enough to cover her lost wages, the baby's medical expenses, and a buffer to tide them over while she sought new employment after maternity leave. Pamela added a final note, coverage of legal fees. Milo's side grimaced but relented. The mediator typed up the settlement terms. Pamela read them aloud to confirm the details. Willow Creek Advertising would pay a lump sum covering lost wages, emotional distress, and legal fees. Rachel would sign a limited confidentiality agreement regarding the settlement amount, but retain the right to discuss her experience privately and with future employers if needed. The company admitted no wrongdoing formally, but acknowledged an oversight that led to her termination. Milo's eyes flicked up, meeting Rachel's gaze. She saw bitterness there, but also defeat. He scribbled his signature on the documents with a shaky hand. Rachel followed suit, her heart pounding as she wrote her name with slow deliberation. And just like that, it was over. The mediator offered a small smile, wishing everyone well. Rachel exhaled, a profound weight lifting from her. As they gathered their belongings, Milo cleared his throat. "Rachel," he said, tone faltering. She paused, turning to face him. He looked at her pregnant belly, eyes betraying a moment of regret. "You were a good designer. I hope you understand this was business. Nothing personal." For a second, she almost laughed at the absurdity. But she simply shook her head. "It was personal, Milo. You made it personal the moment you decided my pregnancy was a liability." She didn't wait for his response, turning instead to walk out, Adam's arm steady at her back. Stepping into the bright hallway outside the conference room, Rachel felt tears well in her eyes. These tears, however, were ones of relief, catharsis. She felt her unborn child's gentle kick, as if celebrating this small victory with her. Pamela caught up, placing a hand on Rachel's shoulder. "You did it," the attorney said quietly, smiling. "You stood up for yourself, and for other women who might face the same thing." Rachel hugged her, gratitude surging. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. Adam slipped an arm around her waist as they left the building. Outside, the sun shone in a clear sky, a warmth kissing their faces despite the early spring breeze. Rachel inhaled deeply, feeling an unfamiliar but welcome lightness in her chest. She was free, free from the toxic environment, free from the cloud of doubt, and yes, free to figure out her future on her terms. News of the lawsuit's conclusion spread quietly within local business circles. Though the settlement terms were partly confidential, rumors circulated that Willow Creek had paid a hefty sum to a pregnant former employee. Some whispered that other employees felt emboldened to speak up about Milo's harsh leadership style. A few even parted ways with the company, citing the manager's hostile environment. Rachel, meanwhile, channeled the settlement money into setting up a comfortable nursery at home. A simple crib, soft neutral-toned walls, cheerful artwork depicting woodland animals. She also used some of it for advanced prenatal care and to pay down the looming hospital bills. It was a relief to know she had a financial cushion. Still, she was mindful not to blow the money on unnecessary luxuries. She wanted to ensure it lasted through her maternity period and allowed her time to find a new job that appreciated her talents and recognized her worth. As her due date approached, she felt the baby's movements intensify, each little kick a reminder of a life soon to join them. Adam teased that their child might grow up to be a professional soccer player. Rachel laughed, feeling genuine joy for the first time in months. They were about to become parents, a role far more significant than any professional title she'd held. She felt fierce and protective of that precious life. In early May, about 2 weeks before her predicted due date, Rachel began experiencing contractions. At first, they were mild twinges, but by late evening, they became frequent and insistent. Adam scrambled to gather the hospital bag, his face alight with nervous excitement. They navigated the city streets in their car, late-night traffic mercifully light, rushing to the hospital. Through waves of pain, Rachel clutched Adam's hand, reminding herself of how far she'd come, fired from her job, forced to fight for justice, and now on the brink of welcoming new life. Labor was intense, but the hospital staff guided her with encouragement. Hours blurred together. Adam stayed by her side, stroking her hair and whispering affirmations. Finally, With one powerful push, the baby's cry pierced the air. A tiny wailing bundle was placed in Rachel's arms, pink, warm, and absolutely perfect. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Adam, tears glistening in his own eyes, brushed a kiss on the baby's forehead. They named her Anna. In that moment, any lingering bitterness about Willow Creek advertising felt distant, overshadowed by an overwhelming wave of love. Life had shifted, expanded. This little human was their new priority. And though the future remained unwritten, Rachel felt a sense of purpose blossoming anew. In the following weeks, Rachel immersed herself in motherhood. Late-night feedings, endless diaper changes, the mesmerizing joy of Anna's tiny fingers wrapped around hers. It was exhausting, yet deeply fulfilling. She found a surprising sense of calm in the chaos. The settlement funds gave her the peace of mind to fully recover and bond with her newborn, without rushing back into the workforce immediately. Still, the creative spark within her itched for expression. One quiet afternoon, while Anna napped, Rachel opened her laptop. She scrolled through job listings, though she wasn't sure she was ready for an office position. Then a thought struck her. Why not start something of her own? The idea of being her own boss, working from home or on flexible terms, suddenly seemed not just possible but downright appealing. She'd always dreamed of running a small freelance agency, focusing on family-friendly brands. After all, her biggest recent project was for an organic foods company that loved her designs. Perhaps she could take on more clients in a direct capacity, skipping the corporate middleman. The notion thrilled her. She quickly typed a list of steps. Build a simple portfolio website, connect with past clients, reach out on professional networks, and see if a part-time or full-time approach was feasible. Over the next months, as Anna grew stronger and started sleeping in slightly longer stretches, Rachel took small but decisive steps toward establishing Sunlit Designs, her personal graphic design studio. She set up social media accounts, posted some of her old design successes, and leveraged word of mouth among friends and prior business contacts. Slowly, inquiries trickled in. She found that many up-and-coming local companies preferred to hire an individual designer they trusted over a large, impersonal agency. By the time Anna was 8 months old, Rachel was juggling a handful of steady clients. She worked from her home office, a corner of a living room, really pausing to nurse Anna or rock her to sleep, then returning to her digital canvases. Adam admired her resilience, often remarking how proud he was that she turned adversity into a chance for independence. Their finances stabilized as her client base grew. She began to see more potential for expansion. Maybe she'd hire an assistant or collaborator one day. Throughout it all, the memory of Willow Creek advertising lingered in the back of her mind. She heard occasional updates. Eric had left and found a better job at a competitor. Milo's reputation took a hit, and some major brands apparently chose other agencies to avoid association with a business that had been publicly linked, albeit quietly, to a pregnancy discrimination lawsuit. The justice felt partial, but it was enough to know he hadn't emerged unscathed. One sunny morning, as Rachel sipped coffee while Anna napped, she answered a phone call from a prospective client. "Hello, Sunlit Designs, this is Rachel," she greeted warmly. A female voice responded, "Hi, Rachel. My name is Michelle from Breezy Baby Clothing. I was referred by the Jacobs brand. Apparently, you did incredible designs for them a while back, and they raved about your creativity." Rachel smiled, heart skipping. "Yes, Jacobs was a project I once worked on. I'd love to learn more about your brand." Michelle laughed. "We're a small, family-oriented clothing line for infants and toddlers. We focus on ethical production and comfortable materials. We'd love a new campaign that speaks to modern parents, colorful, warm, inclusive. We heard you're a mother yourself, and that you have a knack for tapping into that authentic feeling." Rachel's mind buzzed with ideas, pastel color palettes, playful typography, and genuine family moments. "That sounds right up my alley. I'd be thrilled to work with you." They spent the next half hour discussing project details, budgets, and timelines. By the end, Michelle sounded eager to proceed. Perfect, she said. Let's finalize this. I'll email the contract. So glad to have connected. After hanging up, Rachel leaned back, a grin tugging at her lips. Her mind drifted to the day Milo fired her. How desolate she'd felt. In her darkest moment, she never would have guessed she'd be here, running her own small creative business, thriving on her own terms, working with companies that actually respected her as both a designer and a mother. Adam entered the living room carrying a basket of laundry. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her wistful expression. She stood, crossing to him, hugging him around the waist. "More than okay," she whispered. "I just landed a new client, Breezy Baby Clothing. Jacobs recommended me." He kissed the top of her head. "You see? All that talent, all that heart. People notice." She beamed. Anna stirred in her crib, letting out a soft coo. The morning light poured through the window, illuminating the space with warmth. "I love you," she told Adam, "and I love our little family." He squeezed her hand. "And I love that you never gave up." Months turned into a year, and Rachel's success as an independent designer continued. She occasionally heard from her attorney, Pamela, who would check in to see how life was treating her. "It's incredible how things worked out," Pamela remarked in one phone call. "You might have set a precedent. I've gotten a few new clients referencing your case. Women who realize they do have a chance to fight back." Rachel's heart swelled with gratitude. She liked the thought that her struggle had ignited courage in others. "That's wonderful. I hope they find justice too," she said. Meanwhile, Willow Creek Advertising's fortunes declined. The gossip around town was that multiple employees left due to Milo's oppressive leadership, and one of their major investors pulled out after hearing more rumors of poor ethics. Rachel tried not to dwell on it. She was forging her own path, and she preferred to channel her energy into positive growth. But part of her felt a quiet satisfaction that karma had come knocking on Milo's door. One day, as she juggled a phone meeting, the doorbell rang. Adam was at work and Anna napped, so Rachel paused her conversation to check who it might be. When she peered through the peephole, she froze. Milo West stood there, looking distinctly disheveled. No pristine suit, just a rumpled blazer, pallid complexion, and eyes underscored by fatigue. Her stomach lurched. She opened the door, just a crack. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Rachel." Hello." Heart pounding, she stared at him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice guarded. He shifted from foot to foot. "May I come in?" "Just for a minute." She almost refused, but a surge of curiosity and the faint notion of closure prodded her. "Fine," she said, stepping aside. "Keep your voice down, my daughter's napping." He entered, glancing around the modest apartment. She motioned for him to sit in the living room, but stayed standing, arms crossed. He looked around at the decorations. The baby toys scattered near the sofa, a small desk with her laptop open and design sketches scattered about. He exhaled. "So, I want to talk to you about everything." His gaze flickered to a toy rattle on the coffee table. "I saw some news about your design business. People say you're doing well." She swallowed, not sure how to respond. "Yes, Sunlit Designs is going fine. Why does that matter to you?" Milo pursed his lips, awkwardly smoothing his jacket. "Willow Creek. Well, we've had setbacks. We lost clients. The media got hold of your story. Some bloggers wrote about pregnancy discrimination, how you won a settlement. We took a hit. I realize I made mistakes." Rachel felt a flare of anger. "Yes, you did. You fired me just when I needed support the most." He nodded slowly, as though forcibly swallowing his pride. "And I regret that. You were a talented designer. I was too focused on the bottom line. I worried about maternity leave, deadlines, overhead. I was short-sighted." He let out a shaky breath. "I came here to apologize." She stood still, absorbing his words. A swirl of emotions rose in her chest, bitterness, resentment, but also a yearning for closure. "An apology won't fix the stress and pain you caused me." "I know," he said softly, eyes downcast. "But it's something. I realize you might not forgive me. His voice quavered. Willow Creek is basically on the brink. We're restructuring, trying to salvage what's left. I'm stepping down. The board insists I retire or something akin to it. I guess it's all coming back around. Rachel took a moment to absorb that. Milo stepping down? The once proud, borderline arrogant CEO forced out by his own board. She felt no immediate joy in his downfall, more a sense of full-circle justice. He paused, looking up at her. Listen, I'm not here to ask for sympathy. But if I can do anything to make amends, recommend you to bigger clients, connect you with my old contacts, anything, you only have to ask. She studied him. The sincerity seemed genuine, or at least as genuine as she'd ever seen from him. A memory flashed. The day he callously handed her a manila envelope, showing no empathy. Now he was in her living room, subdued and regretful. She thought about what she needed from him, if anything. In truth, she no longer needed his help. Her business was flourishing on its own. She exhaled softly. I appreciate the apology, Milo. Truly. But I've moved on. I don't need your connections or recommendations. Her voice held neither malice nor undue softness, just calm finality. I built something new, something better for me and my family. He nodded, seeming both relieved and forlorn. Understood. She took a half step forward, her tone gentling. I hope you learn from this. I hope you treat people better in whatever you do next. A faint tear glistened in Milo's eye, though he blinked it away rapidly. I will, he murmured. Thank you for hearing me out. He glanced around at the living room one last time, as if memorizing it, then slowly made his way to the door. Rachel followed, opening it for him. As he stepped out into the hallway, he paused. I really am sorry, Rachel. Then he bowed his head and disappeared down the stairs. She closed the door, leaning against it. Her heart pounded, with a strange mix of closure and lingering sadness that had ever happened. She turned to see that Anna had awakened, babbling quietly in her crib. With a soft smile, Rachel walked over, scooped her daughter up, and inhaled the sweet scent of baby shampoo. Life had changed drastically since that day Milo fired her. She had lost so much security, only to discover an unexpected wellspring of resilience. She'd found a lawyer who championed her rights, discovered the strength to stand up to injustice, welcomed her daughter into the world, and built a small business that gave her both creative fulfillment and the flexibility of motherhood. Now, with Milo gone, she felt the final chord of that chapter strike in a satisfying resolution. It was time to fully embrace the new chapter unfolding, a life shaped by her own terms, where empathy and creativity thrived without fear. A week later, Rachel delivered the final designs for Breezy Baby Clothing's ad campaign. The client raved about the bright, playful approach, praising her ability to capture real parental warmth. They paid her promptly, and within days, the ads appeared on social media and in local print. She saw them pop up in her feed, images of mothers cuddling giggling infants, the text reading, comfy, ethical, for the moments that matter. She smiled. That evening, she stepped outside with Anna, who was securely snuggled into a baby carrier against Rachel's chest. They strolled down the block, early summer air brushing warmly over their faces. Adam joined them on foot, clasping Rachel's hand. The little family meandered into a local park, where children laughed on playgrounds and couples lounged on the grass, soaking in the gold-tinged sunset. They found a bench near a flower bed in full bloom. Rachel rocked Anna gently, noticing how the baby's wide eyes marveled at the colorful petals. She recalled a time she doubted she could provide a safe, stable life for her daughter. But that fear had melted away, replaced by a fierce confidence. She had overcome adversity, stood up to an unfair boss, endured the heartbreak of losing a job while pregnant, and emerged stronger. The settlement offered them security, but it was her own passion and grit that propelled her forward. She was living proof that, sometimes, life's harshest trials pave the way to unexpected blessings. Adam slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Look at her," he said softly, eyes on Anna's curious gaze. She's mesmerized by these flowers. Rachel smiled, nestling closer to him. She sees the world with fresh eyes. It's all new and beautiful to her. She brushed a fingertip across Anna's tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around hers in a gentle squeeze. They sat there quietly, letting the dusk settle in around them. In that moment, Rachel felt an unshakable peace. Her past battles, the heartbreak of that humiliating termination, the fear for her future, they had all led her here, to this bench, in this park, with the two people she loved most. She realized that the next step in her life was entirely hers to define. She had the freedom to shape her career, to mother her child, to love her family, and to stand tall as an example to others facing discrimination. A breeze ruffled the blossoms, and Anna giggled at the moving petals. Adam laughed lightly. Rachel's heart soared. Indeed, what had once felt like the darkest day, getting fired while pregnant, had transformed into a powerful lesson. Resilience in the face of injustice, faith in the kindness of strangers and allies, and ultimately, the forging of a life more aligned with who she truly was. She placed a soft kiss on Anna's forehead and watched the last rays of sun dip below the horizon. Tomorrow a new day would dawn, with fresh projects to tackle, new designs to create, and a precious child to raise. The future felt bright, and she was ready to greet it with open arms, her own success story, born from hardship, shimmering with promise.